Welcome back to the Countdown with Dean Kirk, trolling up this fantasy playlist of August 29th, 1987 from number 45, and won't stop until we reach the summit of this fantasy playlist. Got a heck of a song at number one, too, that you probably remember pretty vividly, and hopefully get in some top 40 extras before we get to the number one song. But let's talk about song number 21, halfway up the fantasy playlist, or close to it anyway. Up 6 from 27, Swingout Sister with Breakout. Back in the summer of 1987, I remember watching the video of this song for the first time on Night Tracks, WTBS. They broke the video before the radio stations here started to play it. That's what I liked about Night Tracks. They'd break these videos, and then maybe about a week or two later, I'll hear it on the radio. So it was with the Swingout Sister record. One fine rhythmic pop record, garnished with jazzy horns, smooth vocals. This song could be sung in a lounge. If anything, to me, this song, it sounds like it emanates more from the French Quarter in New Orleans as opposed to it being created in England, because it's got that big, easy, that Mardi Gras, maybe a muted Mardi Gras feel to it. It just sounds American. That's what I tell you, the British are just good at this. The Europeans, but particularly the British, I mean, after all, we do speak the same language. Different accents, but same language, but they're really good at just sounding American. Well, we're all retaining some of their Britishness at the same time. But number 21 on this fancy playlist, the band had only been together for about 2 years before they had their big hit. And it was a 2-record deal. I'll get into that in just a minute. First off, the band formed in Manchester, England in 1985. Manchester, the Hollies came from Manchester. And if I remember correctly, I believe Oasis also came from Manchester. But don't quote me on that. But I'm reasonably sure they came from Manchester. I don't know how I got caught up in Oasis. We're talking about Swingout Sister. We're in the 80s, baby, in the big 80s. I need some of that big hair and some hairspray right here in front of me. Andy Cornell, keyboard player. He teamed up with Martin Jackson, the drummer, 1985, and they were later joined by a fashion designer. Her name was Corinne Drury, Drewery. They got a 2-record deal. Sink or swim. First record sank. The second record had to fly. This was a situation that required, Houston, we have liftoff. Houston, we have the song in orbit. Or else they'll be dropped from the record label. That put a lot of pressure on Corinne Drury. She wrote the song. But before she wrote it, she encountered one heck of a mental block. She was under a lot of stress. She wanted to write. Now, some of that mental block was self-imposed because she wanted to write a perfect song. She knew she had to write a hit or something that was going to connect one way or the other. But it took her a while to write the song. As a matter of fact, the day before the deadline, there was a deadline. The day before the deadline, the artist and repertoire guy from the record company, he called. He said, "Do you have the song ready yet?" Corinne says no, and he says, "Look, you're only writing a bloody nursery rhyme," something to that effect. He made it sound really easy, but she was dealing with this writing block. She didn't have any ideas, didn't get any help from her bandmates either, because they're out on the road. The drummer, Martin Jackson, he was doing his thing in Manchester. And I forgot to mention Andy Cornell. He was in a band called Certain Ratio. He was on the road with his band, and they called her. They would call her and say, have you got the lyrics finished yet? She said no, and she couldn't really get any help from them. So here she is. She's by herself in her apartment in London. So she's in London, and the drummers in Manchester, and Andy Cornell, the keyboard player, he's wherever he is in England on tour with the band, and she's sitting there with her microphone. The microphone's plugged in the back of her stereo. Now here's what happened though. The night before the deadline, she had an idea. Just a light bulb went off. But she couldn't record the idea because it was in the middle of the night. And the next day, she remembered the idea. She came up with this unique system. She remembered the idea. She was thinking of a duck. She combined a duck clucking with Michael Jackson's Thriller, and somehow came out with Breakout by Swingout Sister. She kind of busted through her writing block. And this is at the last minute because she's sitting there with the microphone and the stereo system coming up with lyrics, and she had about half hour to go before somebody came by to pick up the tape, and she had the song done. And sometimes that time crunch, it can work, it's a double-edged sword. It can work both ways. Sometimes it can help you create a record and create a song or an idea at the last minute, and sometimes it just completely just flatten you, just shut you down. Fortunately, for the sake of the band, period, she managed to come up with something. She came up with a hit record, Breakout. The first single, as I've already noted, was a bomb, but Breakout did really well, going top 10. Actually, matter of fact, it went to number 6 in England back in the fall of 1986, and went to number went to number 4 in the UK in the fall of 86, and went to number 6 here in the US. So she managed to finish the song just when the person came by to pick up the tape. Boy, that was a miracle right there. They had another song out after that, I remember. Back in the winter of 87 and 88, it was, I forgot the name of the song. It was more of an up-tempo record. Actually, maybe not quite it didn't quite sparkle with as much originality as Breakout, but it was a pretty smooth pop record. I think it was called Twilight Song or Twilight something, I forgot. But I can't remember the exact name of the song. But I got to tell you something. Just one more shout out. A song they did. They did a fantastic remake. Swingout Sister. They came back in 1992 with a remake of Am I the Same Girl? Which was an R&B hit, an instrumental, and there was a vocal version in the late 60s. A song, Am I the Same Girl, written by Eugene Church, co-written by Eugene Record, not Eugene Church. I'm confused him with an R&B record from R&B artist from the 50s. Eugene Record, who co-wrote that song of the Shy-Lights. Eugene Record, the lead singer of the Shy-Lights, who co-wrote some of their big hits, Have You Seen Her and all that. Well, he co-wrote this record. Now, it started out as an instrumental. There's a complicated story, but I'm not going to get into that. It started out as an instrumental called Soulful Strut by Young Holt Unlimited. That was in the latter part of 68. And then Barbara Acklin, soul singer Barbara Acklin, she was popular back in the 60s. She did a version. She did the vocal version of Am I the Same Girl? And the Swingout Sister version was the take of the Barbara on the Barbara Acklin version of Am I the Same Girl? But they did a smooth remake of it back in 1992. How about that? Well, that ends this video right here, my friend. We are at number 21, Swingout Sister with Breakout.